TikTok ruined Steve Lacy, but not in the way you think. In the summer of 2022, Steve Lacy was basically a household name. There was nobody who hadn't heard Bad Habit and nobody that didn't know the artist behind the song. In fact, the success of Bad Habit took Steve Lacy all the way from indie darling to superstar overnight, and yet it seemed like it destroyed something inside of him. From fans throwing objects on stage to the crowd being dead silent at his concerts, it seems as though Steve Lacy is just another victim of the TikTok curse. But first, let's start at the beginning. Born in Compton, California, Steve Lacy's path to success was always going to be a difficult one, or at the very least, more difficult than it is for the usual person. Especially after the passing of his father at an early age, Lacy would somehow have to overcome the obstacles he was presented with pretty quickly. And though the adversity was high, Steve Lacy did find a way to overcome it, mainly in the way of music, which he took interest on thanks to Guitar Hero and his mom. And well, by the end of high school, he would not only take part in, he would also join the internet, producing several tracks on the album as well as performing on some of them. Which, for those who aren't aware, is a pretty big deal. Sure, the band isn't necessarily commercially successful, but critically, it had a lot of fans. In terms of critical reception, every major news outlet gave the album a good to great rating, and the record was even nominated for a Grammy for Best Urban Contemporary Album. And additionally, it just put Steve Lacy on a lot of people's radar, whether it be working on projects like Denzel Curry's Imperial, J. Cole's For Your Eyes Only, or Kendrick Lamar's Damn. Steve Lacy was putting in work all by the age of 18. Made even more impressive by the fact that Steve Lacy recorded most of his songs on his phone.
You might notice there's all this studio equipment behind him. Steve doesn't use any of it. He's used lots of apps before, but GarageBand is his favorite.
I started off with a simple drum loop.
Which I personally understand. I also record my videos on the phone. But he was doing way more than I'm doing. Not only was he recording vocals, he was making beats on GarageBand, and he was making probably more money than I am. Which, I mean, isn't the biggest deal, but you know, you can sub to the channel and you can help me out, or not, you know. But I am on my way to 50K, and I would like to hit 50K before the year ends. So if you can help me out with that one, I'd appreciate it. You don't have to though. If there was something that you could criticize Steve Lacy on though, it was that he wasn't necessarily making chart-topping music. Sure, he was working with big fishes like Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, but he wasn't necessarily making the commercial hit. However, Steve Lacy didn't really care about that. In a 2020 interview with Medium, Lacy is quoted as saying the following in regards to fame: "I want the success, but not the things that come with it. On Twitter, you see famous people getting bashed all the time." Additionally, when asked what the ideal career path or what artist he could see himself end up becoming, he talked about his admiration for Frank Ocean and his mysteriousness. Or in other ways, he would like the money, but fame is not necessarily for him. And honestly, for an artist like Steve Lacy, the worst thing that can happen is probably blowing up on TikTok. And that's exactly what happened. Heading into 2022, Steve Lacy's sound had found a home on TikTok. Of course, that isn't to say that Lacy was unsuccessful beforehand, as he was respected throughout the music industry, and he did have fans as well. But the new audience that he found on the app couldn't be ignored. Something about Steve Lacy's aesthetic and sound fit the vibe that everybody had in a post-quarantine world. Something about that slow alternative sound just fit the mood, not just of TikTok, but many people around the world. But it was on TikTok that the sound really resonated with people, which became way more relevant with the release of Bad Habit. Whether through the sped up, slowed down, or just the original version of the track, Bad Habit just hit the people in a way no other song in 2022 really did. I mean, the song's success was enough to earn Steve Lacy not only his first ever solo chart hit on Billboard, but his first chart-topping hit as well. And listen, the charts might say that Bad Habit was only number 1 for 3 weeks, but it sure felt like that song was on top of the world for way longer. The former quote-unquote underground artist had found himself in the mainstream of music. He was on SNL, and honestly, It was rightfully earned. The story of Steve Lacy was not that of an overnight success. It was a story of grinding and perseverance and making the most out of what you have. So it sucked so much to see that his blow up came from TikTok.
Please. Yeah, that's it. Peace.
Now, we've all used TikTok, we all know what it is, but for whatever reason, there's just something about TikTok that makes everyone mad. But then again, if you really think about it, don't we really hate on every social media? But I will say, TikTok is different in one way that all other social medias aren't, because TikTok relies heavily on music. And as a result, not only do people hate TikTok, they hate TikTok music, which you would think would carry a certain aesthetic, but the truth is that any song can be TikTok music as long as it's famous on TikTok. Regardless of the genre, the artist, or whatever it may be, if you hear a song on TikTok enough, it just becomes that TikTok song. And nobody embodied this more than Steve Lacy. Personally, I don't hate TikTok or TikTok music, but there's a lot of people that do, and Steve Lacy just became that avatar for people to hate on. No longer was Steve Lacy the artist that only critics knew about and everybody loved them. He was the poster boy of what it meant to blow up on TikTok. But it's important to remember that it wasn't all hate. At the end of the day, for a song like Bad Habit to go #1, a lot of people probably have to like the song. And in many ways, this could be the blessing of TikTok. It provides an artist with a fan base that he wouldn't have had before, which was true for Steve Lacy. For reference, Gemini Rights peaked at #7 in the Billboard 200. And in comparison to his studio debut album, Apollo 21, which peaked at not even the top 150, Steve Lacy was doing good. However, the bad thing about these fans, and what continues to be a curse about TikTok, is that they're not guaranteed to be good fans, which would become more apparent once Steve Lacy went on tour. With a higher demand for Steve Lacy concert tickets, not only did ticket prices go up, but the quote-unquote real fans were priced out. Or in other words, attending the shows of Steve Lacy were more people that knew him from TikTok rather than people who knew him for him, which technically isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, it does get pretty sad when the crowd doesn't know the lyrics to your song.
The way nobody sang the next verse embarrassing as.
Got tickets and I don't even want to sing the fucking songs.
And not just any random song, but your biggest song. In fact, the song that made them go to the concert in the first place, which is somehow exactly what happened to Steve Lacy. Of course, there's an easy way to explain this. Back in the day, people listened mostly on radio, which meant you had to listen to the whole song. And even like not that long ago, most people listen to songs on YouTube. On TikTok, you usually only hear one snippet of a song, and it's usually hard for more than one snippet to go viral. So what would happen if you put a bunch of these TikTok fans in a room with Steve Lacy is that they would only sing that snippet of the song, which is exactly what happened. And of course, the situation wasn't only embarrassing for the fans, it was embarrassing for Steve Lacy as well, which also wasn't helped by other things happening at the concert. The narrative around Steve Lacy became a negative one, almost as if people were calling him an overnight success who got too big for his own good. But that wasn't the case. According to Steve Lacy, for the most part, on most nights, fans did sing along with most of Bad Habit. And not just Bad Habit, but other songs as well. And on top of that, a lot of the reviews for the concert were positive. But because Steve Lacy was an artist that got big on TikTok, it was just easier to put him in a negative light. forgetting everything that he had done to lead up to the success of Bad Habit. And that is the curse of TikTok. It's not the overplay and the trends on TikTok that ruin an artist. It's the diminishing of an artist's work because they blew up on TikTok. And that is how TikTok ruined Steve Lacy. Anyways, yeah, how's life? Mine's good, you know. I don't have much to say over here, so I won't. Shout out to Jay Dilla. Shout out to Kendrick Lamar though. I will say that. Shout out to God, and shout out to me, and shout out to y'all. I almost forgot. And yeah.